Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into a world that smells faintly of eucalyptus oil, celebrity anxiety, and the quiet hum of machines that cost more than your first car. Welcome to Hollywood's newest wellness trend, exclusive ketamine clinics. Not the shady back alley kind, not the guy with crystals and a suspicious van kind. I'm talking about pristine therapy rooms tucked behind palm trees and frosted glass doors, where stressed-out actors, tech billionaires, and screenwriters with 3 existential crises before lunch come to legally trip their way toward inner peace. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and thank you for suggesting this topic. It was such a fun one to explore. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and someone out there is definitely listening to this while staring at the ceiling, wondering if their life choices led them to a ketamine drip and a meditation playlist. Now dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft background hum, settle into your blankets, and get comfortable. Tonight we're going to gently wander through one of the strangest intersections of modern culture: mental health, psychedelics, and Hollywood wealth. Because somewhere between therapy, neuroscience, and a mild existential meltdown, a new kind of clinic appeared in Los Angeles. A place where people lie back in designer recliners, put on noise-cancelling headphones, and explore the far reaches of their subconscious while a nurse quietly checks their blood pressure. But let's pause for a moment and ask some important questions. How did a party drug from the 1990s become one of the most talked about treatments for depression? Why are celebrities whispering about it like it's a secret cheat code for the human brain? What exactly happens when someone signs up for psychedelic therapy in a city where the rent cost more than medieval castles used to? And perhaps most importantly, if you walked into one of these clinics tomorrow, would you leave feeling enlightened or just slightly confused and $3,000 poorer? Would you trust a treatment that involves drifting through your memories while ambient music plays in the background? Would you feel calm knowing your therapist is sitting quietly beside you while your brain decides to replay every embarrassing moment from middle school? And why, of all places, did this entire psychedelic renaissance explode right in the middle of Hollywood? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in modern Los Angeles. The year is somewhere in the 2020s. The traffic is already terrible, the oat milk lattes are $9, and just down the street from a yoga studio and a juice bar, there's a very calm, very expensive clinic where people are lining up to explore their minds with ketamine. Let's begin. You step out of the blinding California sun and into a quiet clinic lobby that smells faintly of lavender and wealth. The chairs are minimalist, the receptionist speaks in soothing tones, and somewhere in the background a waterfall fountain is doing its best impression of inner peace. This is not the gritty medical environment you might expect. This is Hollywood wellness, where therapy meets luxury spa and existential dread gets a designer waiting room. As you stand there blinking, slightly disoriented, you begin to realize there's a type of person this place was built for. And that person is definitely not wearing sweatpants. The clinic is filled with people who look like they recently cried in a Bentley. A producer in aviator sunglasses, a yoga instructor who has probably spoken to more crystals than people, a screenwriter clutching his emotional support kombucha. Everyone here has that same haunted yet moisturized look, the face of someone who has spent 20 years pretending they're fine. Let's be honest. Hollywood has always loved a reinvention arc. This is the city where grown adults adopt gluten-free lifestyles with the seriousness of medieval knights taking vows. It is a place where people spend more money on grounding sandals than medieval peasants spent on their entire homes. So when ketamine therapy quietly floated into the wellness scene, it made perfect sense that Los Angeles would embrace it the way a toddler embraces an iPad. You walk deeper into the lobby and immediately notice the artwork. Abstract paintings line the walls, the kind that look like someone sneezed paint during a spiritual awakening. Each piece has a tiny plaque listing the artist, and a price tag that makes you shiver. You're not sure what's being treated here first, your depression or your financial boundaries. Behind the desk, the receptionist hands you a clipboard with forms printed on recycled bamboo paper. She smiles with the gentle efficiency of someone who has watched many people attempt to explain their emotional trauma using astrology terms. "Just fill out whatever feels right to your spirit," she says, which is a sentence only a Hollywood clinic could get away with. You take a seat in one of the minimalist chairs. They look comfortable, but the second you sit down, you realize they were designed by a Scandinavian sadist who believes lumbar support is a myth. You shift around, trying to find a position that doesn't feel like you're being punished for your sins. Meanwhile, the waterfall fountain continues its relentless trickle, which may or may not be slowly filling you with the urge to pee. Across from you, a woman in an expensive cardigan is whispering into her phone. "No, I can't do lunch today," she says softly. "I'm doing my mental clarity session." She pauses, sighs dramatically, and adds, "Yes, the ketamine one. No, I told you, it's legal now." She hangs up, stares into the middle distance, and resumes sipping her $12 herbal tea. She looks like she's lived through 5 divorces and 1 disappointing pet psychic. A staff member in pale scrubs appears and calls your name. "We'll take you back now," they say. Their voice is so calm you'd think they were guiding you to an afternoon nap instead of a psychedelic therapy session. You follow them down a hallway lit like a high-end yoga studio. Soft, warm, slightly too dim to feel safe but bright enough to suggest financial solvency. As you walk, they explain the philosophy of the clinic. "We believe in whole-person healing," they say. "We treat the mind, the body, and the energetic field." You nod politely, even though you have no idea what an energetic field is and suspect they might have made it up 5 minutes ago. They continue describing a treatment approach that blends neuroscience, mindfulness, high-budget interior decorating, and a pricing structure that absolutely requires generational wealth. Finally, you arrive at your therapy room. It looks less like a medical space and more like the VIP section of a meditation retreat. Soft lighting, plush recliner, artisanal tissues arranged by someone with a minor in origami. On the side table rests a bowl of ethically sourced snacks that all taste like sadness wrapped in chia seeds. Your guide gives you a reassuring smile. "This is where your journey begins," they say. And standing there, staring at a recliner that cost more than your first car, you realize something important. Only in Hollywood could emotional healing require a room this nice. Long before celebrities began whispering about it over green juice, ketamine had a very different reputation. Originally developed in the 1960s as an anesthetic, it was used in hospitals, battlefields, and veterinary clinics. In other words, the drug that now promises emotional healing once spent decades helping surgeons and occasionally calming down very large horses. But that's Hollywood for you. Nothing stays in its original lane. One day you're a humble sedative, the next you're the star of a wellness revolution being explained on a podcast by an actor who hasn't worked since 2014. Ketamine didn't ask to be famous. Ketamine was just minding its business, preventing horses from kicking veterinarians into new dimensions. Then suddenly researchers realized it could also yank humans out of depression faster than a therapist can say, "Let's explore that." The story really starts on the battlefield, where medical teams needed something strong enough to knock soldiers out quickly, but safe enough that it wouldn't stop their breathing. Ketamine fit the bill perfectly. It worked fast, tolerated chaos, and didn't require machines that beep loudly and cause anxiety. Picture a medic crouched under fire, administering a drug that today is given in serene rooms with Himalayan salt lamps. You can't make this up. Eventually the drug made its way into emergency rooms where it became the go-to anesthetic for situations too wild for traditional sedatives. Ketamine was like the Swiss Army knife of medicine. Practical, versatile, and slightly intimidating. It could sedate a child getting stitches, relax a dog during a tooth extraction, or numb a Navy SEAL before surgery. It was everywhere, except juice bars, which would come later. Then the 1990s happened, and like everything else in the 90s, butterfly clips, frosted tips, dial-up internet, ketamine went through an identity crisis. It slipped into the club scene as a party drug, developing a reputation that involved glow sticks, bad decisions, and warehouses filled with people whose pupils were in open rebellion. For a while, ketamine looked like it might stay stuck in its awkward adolescence phase forever. But scientists, bless their persistent hearts, kept studying it. And one day, when a group of researchers were trying to understand how different anesthetics affected the brain, they discovered something surprising. Ketamine wasn't just numbing pain, it was jump-starting neural circuitry. People who received small controlled doses weren't just sedated, they were lighter, clearer, unburdened in ways antidepressants often couldn't touch. You can imagine the scientific community's collective eyebrow raising. Wait, a horse tranquilizer helping humans feel emotionally better? Is this allowed? Turns out yes. Ketamine interacts with glutamate receptors, helping the brain rebuild connections weakened by chronic depression, much like rebooting a buggy computer. Except instead of the spinning rainbow wheel of doom, you get a temporary session of floating gently through your subconscious. Word spread. First quietly in medical journals, then in hushed discussions at conferences, then inevitably in Los Angeles, where someone said the 6 most dangerous words in the English language. This could really be something big. And Hollywood heard it. Suddenly producers, actors, screenwriters, and wellness gurus began researching ketamine therapy like it was the newest diet trend. Articles popped up. Podcasts exploded. Instagram influencers filmed themselves leaving clinics wearing oversized sunglasses and a sense of profound introspection. Meanwhile, somewhere, a veterinarian watched the news and thought, really? That stuff? The drug that once soothed anxious horses was now being served, carefully, legally, to humans struggling with depression, PTSD, anxiety, burnout, and general existential dread brought on by being alive in the 21st century. It didn't just treat symptoms slowly over months. It sometimes lifted them in hours. For people who felt like they'd been carrying emotional sandbags for years, this was nothing short of a miracle. And that's how ketamine graduated from barns and battlefields to the glowing heart of Los Angeles wellness culture. From tranquilizing 1,200-pound animals to helping fragile, screenwriters process their feelings about pilot season. A trajectory so strange it could only be real. Imagine living with depression that refuses to budge. Years of therapy, medications, lifestyle changes, meditation apps, gratitude journals, and yet the weight remains. For many people, especially in high-pressure industries like film and entertainment, traditional treatments often feel painfully slow or ineffective. That frustration became the quiet doorway through which psychedelic therapy began to enter the conversation. In Hollywood, emotional exhaustion is practically a cultural landmark. You can map the city by where people had their first existential crisis. Inside a Whole Foods, in traffic on the 405, or during a pitch meeting where someone said the words gritty reboot with a straight face. You see it every day, polished, successful people walking around with invisible anvils strapped to their chests. The kind of heaviness not even infrared saunas or $12 turmeric shots can chase away. And then there's you. Maybe you've tried everything. You've journaled until your handwriting devolved into chaotic scribbles. You've meditated so much your app congratulated you with a digital badge shaped like a lotus. You've followed diets with names that sound like boutique hiking trails. Paleo Ridge, Keto Canyon, Mindful Forest. You've even done the thing everyone dreads. opened up to your group chat, and still nothing shifts. The fog persists, stubborn and familiar, like that one roommate who forgot to move out. Let's talk about therapy. You've spent hours reclined on a sofa telling a very kind professional about your childhood, your insecurities, your tendency to cry at cereal commercials. Therapy helps, slowly, gently, but sometimes your brain is like a locked vault guarded by a sleepy but determined dragon. Every session feels like poking that dragon with a soft noodle. Effective, sure, eventually maybe. Then come the medications. Prescribed with care, monitored diligently. They help countless people, but for some, the process feels like cycling through a pharmaceutical speed dating event. This one made you tired. This one made you anxious. This one made you feel emotionally flat, like a sock that's been washed too many times. You appreciate the science, you respect the effort, but something still feels stuck. In industries like film and entertainment, this stuckness becomes amplified. When your job depends on being creative, energetic, charming, brilliant and available 24/7, depression is like trying to swim the Pacific with ankle weights. You sit at your laptop for hours, cursor blinking, brain refusing to pitch even a mediocre idea. Not even a reboot of a reboot. Not even a movie about dogs who solve crimes. Nothing. And the pressure builds. Because no one wants to admit they're struggling while surrounded by people bragging about how their new productivity routine allowed them to wake up at 4 a.m. and realign with their purpose. You start wondering if maybe your purpose overslept and isn't returning your calls. This is the moment many people quietly begin searching for alternatives. Not miracle cures, just something different. Something that moves the needle even a millimeter. Something that acknowledges the complexity of a brain that won't cooperate no matter how many inspirational quotes you write on sticky notes. Enter psychedelic therapy. It starts as a whisper. A friend mentions it in a low voice over brunch. A colleague references a study. You overhear two actors discussing ketamine journeys in line at Erewhon. At first you shrug it off. Hollywood loves weird wellness fads. But then you read about the research. You learn about rapid-acting relief. You realize this isn't about escaping your problems. It's about loosening the mental knots therapy keeps tugging at. You begin imagining a world where your brain shifts even slightly back, towards center. A world where the fog lifts just enough to breathe deeper. A world where you don't wake up already exhausted. And slowly, the idea becomes less strange, less fringe, less LA weird. It becomes a possibility, not a guarantee of happiness, not a cosmic revelation, just a door, a new door, one you haven't walked through yet. And when your emotional exhaustion has outlasted every traditional approach, even the strangest door can start to look like hope. Life in Hollywood may look glamorous from the outside, but beneath the red carpets lies a strange psychological pressure cooker. Careers rise and collapse overnight. Public opinion shifts faster than the weather, and success often comes bundled with anxiety, burnout, and the creeping fear that the next project might be your last. If you've ever spent time in this city, you know the feeling, that unmistakable cocktail of ambition, hope, caffeine, and dread. You can practically taste it in the air somewhere between the smell of eucalyptus trees and overpriced sunscreen. The industry demands everything from you. Your creativity, your time, your mental bandwidth, your ability to pretend you're fine when you haven't slept properly since 2016. You wake up each morning in Hollywood and immediately begin the emotional slalom. One minute you're convinced you're destined for success. The next you're Googling how to pivot careers at any age while holding a half-eaten protein bar. Your phone becomes a tiny anxiety device. Every email could be an opportunity or an emotional landmine. Every text could be good news, bad news, or your agent reminding you to just keep putting yourself out there, which is an extremely polite way of saying, please don't give up yet. Even the city itself contributes to the instability. Traffic forces you into long meditative periods where you're left alone with your thoughts, which is never ideal. Billboards mock you with faces of people who booked the role you auditioned for. Even your barista somehow knows more about your career trajectory than you do. Rough week, they ask, as though it isn't always a rough week. The emotional roller coaster doesn't discriminate either. Actors, writers, editors, producers, everyone is riding the same unpredictable wave. You can be celebrated one day, forgotten the next, and accidentally cancelled the day after. Try experiencing that while also worrying about where to park. This constant instability does something peculiar to the human brain. You begin living in a state of low-level panic, always waiting for the next big thing, good or bad, to drop out of the sky. If anxiety were a sport, half of Los Angeles would qualify for the Olympics. You keep refreshing your email, checking your phone, scanning your socials, hoping for validation, but also somehow dreading it. And let's not forget the burnout. Hollywood burnout is unlike any other burnout. It isn't just exhaustion, it's a spiritual ache. You start wondering if maybe you're not meant to be doing this. Maybe you should open a small bakery somewhere quiet. Maybe you should move to Vermont and raise goats. You fantasize about these alternatives at least twice a day, but you don't move. You stay. Because deep down, some part of you still believes that the future might surprise you. And that's what makes Hollywood the emotional roller coaster it is. The hope. Hope for the role. Hope for the deal. Hope that the 47th revision of your script will finally make someone cry in the right way. Hope that your career isn't a cosmic prank. But hope, when paired with chronic stress, creates a very specific kind of emotional fatigue. The sort that slowly hollows you out while you smile convincingly during networking mixers. It's the kind of exhaustion that no yoga class, no adaptogenic mushroom powder, no manifestation journaling set can quite shake off. And it's this emotional fatigue, simmering quietly beneath the surface of so many people in the city, that made Hollywood uniquely receptive to psychedelic therapy. Because when the highs are terrifying, the lows are suffocating, and your nervous system resembles a badly tuned cello, you start searching for something, anything, that might finally steady the ride. A new tool, a new approach, a new chance to step off the emotional roller coaster even for a moment. Around the early 2010, doctors began quietly experimenting with ketamine infusions for severe depression. The results startled researchers. Some patients reported relief within hours rather than weeks. Word spread quickly, and before long, specialized clinics began opening in major cities, including Los Angeles. At first, these clinics were small, tucked into unmarked office buildings that looked like accountants lived there. You'd walk in expecting someone to ask about your taxes, not your existential despair. Inside, the decor was the minimal, a few chairs, a potted plant trying its best, and brochures that looked like they'd been designed by someone who had recently discovered gradients. There were no glowing Himalayan salt lamps yet, no curated playlists, no therapeutic eye masks infused with lavender harvested by monks, just doctors, IV bags, and a sense of cautious scientific curiosity. But this was Los Angeles, the global capital of taking something medical, polishing it, adding dim lighting, tripling the price, and calling it wellness. It didn't stay clinical for long. Once word got out that ketamine could offer near immediate relief for people who'd tried every standard treatment, things accelerated. The early success stories began circulating, whispered among therapists, captured in medical journals, and inevitably discussed at brunch by people who claimed they weren't into Western medicine but were somehow into this. Soon the clinics evolved. They grew softer, calmer, more curated. It's as if the entire wellness industry collectively decided to give ketamine a makeover montage to a synth-pop soundtrack. Walls were painted warm neutrals. Water features bubbled serenely. Receptionists spoke in voices so gentle they could probably convince your anxiety to take a nap. You'd walk into a ketamine clinic and realize instantly that someone on the design team absolutely owned a diffuser. The whole place smelled like eucalyptus had been elected to office. The early adopters were a fascinating mix. You saw people who had battled depression for decades sitting beside stressed-out professionals, staring at their phones with the haunted expression of someone who just received 17 work emails labelled urgent. And then because it was Los Angeles, you'd occasionally see someone very famous wearing sunglasses indoors and pretending not to be recognised. And honestly, you couldn't blame them. Los Angeles is a city built on reinvention, and here was a treatment promising not just emotional relief, but a reset, a shift, a reboot of the mind, something quicker than therapy, gentler than medication changes, and far less embarrassing than crying in your Prius on the way to Trader Joe's. Researchers kept studying. Results kept rolling in. People who had spent years feeling like they were walking through emotional cement suddenly felt lightness. Not a full cure, ketamine isn't magic, but a moment of space in the noise. A breath. A break. Enough room to think a new thought. Clinics multiplied. A building that once housed a dental office suddenly became a ketamine therapy centre, because apparently nothing soothes human suffering like rebranding old medical suites. More clinics popped up in West Hollywood, Santa Monica, Venice. The usual triangle of spiritual exploration and premium parking fees. Each clinic added its own flourish. One offered guided meditation. Another served herbal tea. Another had a therapy dog who wandered around wearing a tiny vest that said emotional support professional, which honestly is the career many dogs deserve. But beneath the soft lighting and soothing marketing, something real was happening. People weren't just seeking a trend. They were seeking relief. Actual relief. The kind that reaches down into the parts of your mind you haven't dusted in years. And as awareness spread, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be a fringe treatment forever. It was stepping into the mainstream, one softly lit room at a time. You could almost feel the shift, like the city itself sensed a new option, a new path forward. A way to help people who felt stuck in their own minds find a small, precious doorway back to themselves. And that tiny doorway was just getting started. You're guided into a softly lit room with a reclining chair that looks suspiciously like it belongs in first class on an international flight. A nurse places a small IV in your arm, while a therapist explains the process calmly, like someone preparing you for a long, unusual nap. You settle into the chair, sinking slowly like a stressed-out marshmallow being lowered into warm cocoa. The room is quiet, unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet where you could probably hear someone blink. Soft, ambient music plays in the background, something that sounds like two whales discussing their feelings across a vast ocean. A diffuser releases the faint scent of lavender, eucalyptus, and maybe a hint of "please relax, we promise this is science." Your therapist takes a seat beside you, clipboard in hand, nodding gently at your nerves. They've seen this look 1,000 times. The expression of someone who is both very curious and mildly terrified. Everything you experience is normal, they say gently, which is a comforting sentence until you realise it covers a pretty wide emotional range. The nurse adjusts the IV line, taps the bag and asks how you're feeling. You tell them you're fine, which is a hilarious lie. Nobody who signs up for psychedelic therapy is fine. They smile kindly anyway. The lights dim a little more, not dramatically, just enough to make you wonder if you're about to monologue in a prestige drama. The therapist hands you a pair of noise-cancelling headphones, big enough to make DJs jealous. These will help you stay centered, they say. You're not sure what that means, but you nod because the chair has now committed you to this experience fully. When the infusion begins, you don't feel much at first. Maybe a little warmth in your arm, a slight floating sensation in your chest. The familiar hum of the room takes on a soft, velvety texture, like sound but with fewer responsibilities. Your therapist reminds you to breathe naturally, which suddenly becomes a lot harder now that you're thinking about it. They tell you to let go of control, which is adorable because control was one of the main things you were hoping to regain by being here. Soon your body feels heavier and lighter at the same time, which makes zero sense but somehow feels correct. The recliner beneath you softens into a cloud, or maybe you're becoming the cloud. You're not entirely sure. Your limbs dissolve into warm fog. Time stretches out like taffy. Seconds become minutes. Minutes become cinematic sequences scored by ambient synth. You close your eyes and drift. Thoughts appear like bubbles, rising, popping, rearranging themselves into patterns you've never noticed. A childhood memory floats by, a moment you regret, a feeling you haven't named in years. They glide through your awareness gently, as if wearing emotional slippers. The therapist checks in occasionally. They whisper reassuring phrases like, "You're doing great and just let things unfold." You feel safe enough to explore whatever your brain wants to parade across your inner stage. It could be profound insight. It could be a mental slideshow of every awkward thing you've ever said at a dinner party. Either way, you're along for the ride. At some point you become aware of your heartbeat, not in an alarming way. More like your heartbeat is showing you a PowerPoint presentation about how committed it is to keeping you alive. You appreciate it deeply. You may even tear up a little. Or a lot. Who knows? Tears and time both feel optional here. The walls seem farther away. Or closer. Again, hard to say. The room feels like a cocoon woven from soft sounds and dim lights. You think about your life, not with panic, but with a kind of gentle curiosity you wish you could rent like an apartment. Somewhere in this experience, something inside you loosens. A knot you've carried for years begins to unravel. Not completely, you're human, but enough that you feel space where tightness used to live. Eventually the therapist says softly, "You're about halfway through." Halfway? It feels like you've lived 8 emotional lifetimes. But you nod. Or you think you nod. Hard to know. Your body is currently on vacation. And in this drifting, hazy, surreal state, the therapy truly begins. Soon the headphones go on. Ambient music begins drifting through your ears. Gentle piano, distant echoes. Maybe something that sounds like a whale having a philosophical conversation with the ocean. The goal is simple. Relax, let go, and allow the mind to wander. The moment the headphones settle over your ears, the outside world softens, like someone lowered the volume on reality because it was getting a little too loud. The clinic room fades to the background. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant shuffle of footsteps, even the soft tapping of the nurse inputting notes on a tablet, it all dissolves beneath the wash of sound cradling your mind. It isn't ordinary music. No catchy beats. No lyrics designed to ruin your day by getting stuck in your head for hours. This music is engineered, curated, practically brewed like some sort of emotional tea. The piano notes fall slowly, spaced so widely apart. They almost feel like thoughts trying to form. Gentle chimes ripple in the distance, echoing like a memory you haven't accessed since childhood. Then comes the low humming drone, warm and enveloping, like the soundtrack of a sunbeam. And you're sinking deeper into the chair. Not dramatically, just enough to feel like gravity has finally agreed to stop fighting with you. The therapist encourages you to close your eyes. Not to force anything, not to chase meaning or insight, just to let your brain do what it wants for once, without your constant supervision. So you breathe, slowly, in, out, and something subtle shifts. The music begins to feel less like it's entering your ears and more like it's entering your bloodstream. The notes swirl behind your eyes. You become aware of sensations you never pay attention to. The weight of your hands, the coolness of the IV, the soft thrum of your heartbeat syncing with the oceanic breaths of whatever deep-sea creature is currently contributing to the soundtrack. Your thoughts, normally lined up like anxious commuters waiting for their turn to panic, begin loosening their grip. They drift out of formation, floating lazily, as though someone gently nudged them into a warm current. And suddenly, instead of the usual internal chatter, the to-do lists, the worries, the existential grocery items, you get images, a colour, a memory, a feeling, no urgency, no agenda. The music shifts slightly, and it's like your mind agrees to shift with it. A soft swell of strings rises, and with it, your awareness expands. You see something. Maybe your childhood bedroom, maybe an imaginary forest, maybe absolutely nothing at all but a comforting darkness that feels like being wrapped in a cosmic blanket. Your sense of time becomes hilarious. You're not sure if you've been lying there for 3 minutes or 3 centuries. If someone told you time was a social construct invented to sell planners, you'd believe them immediately. Then the music deepens, moving into a slow, pulsing rhythm. It's soothing, but also faintly introspective, like the soundtrack to a documentary about your inner world narrated by Morgan Freeman. Questions bubble up in your mind, but gently. Why have I been holding on to that? Where did that fear come from? What would happen if I let that go? You don't need to answer them. They drift past like clouds, visible, soft, harmless. At one point you feel as though you're floating above your own life, watching it from a distance. Not in a dramatic, movie-style, out-of-body experience, more like you've temporarily become the world's calmest narrator. You observe your patterns, your worries, your hopes, with a kind of tender neutrality you didn't know you were capable of, and the music keeps guiding you. Not pushing, not pulling, just quietly escorting you through the corridors of your own mind like a very polite tour guide. Occasionally you remember that you have a physical body, resting comfortably in a recliner. But your attention slips away again as the soundtrack transitions into soft bells, wind-like whispers, and faint harmonic tones that feel like they were recorded inside a crystal cavern. You're not asleep. You're not awake. You're simply drifting. And in this drifting, something opens, a kind of mental doorway that's usually locked behind errands, responsibilities, and the emotional weight of being a human adult. Here, with the headphones on and the world muted, you finally have permission to explore what's behind it. Ketamine affects the brain in unusual ways. Many people describe floating sensations, dreamlike visions, or the feeling of watching their own memories from a distance. It's not quite sleep, not quite wakefulness, but something strange in between. At first, the shift is subtle. You blink slowly, realizing your eyelids feel like heavy velvet curtains in a very dramatic theatre. The edges of the room soften, like someone applied a blur filter to reality without your permission. You're aware of your body, but also not. Your limbs seem to exist in a pleasant, distant way, like they're sending you postcards from somewhere warm and weightless. Then your thoughts begin behaving oddly. Not in a scary way, more in the way your brain acts when it's 3 a.m. You're tired, and suddenly you're convinced you absolutely must look up whether penguins have knees. There's a dreamlike logic forming, the kind that feels perfectly normal in the moment but impossible to explain afterward. Your mind starts showing you images, some familiar, some entirely new. A childhood memory appears, but softened at the edges, as if wrapped in cotton. You see yourself from across the room, tiny and earnest, wearing an outfit you clearly chose without adult supervision. You observe it all without judgment, just gentle curiosity. It feels like watching a documentary about your own life, narrated in a soothing British accent. Then your brain shifts scenes again. Maybe you see colours, bright, swirling, moving in slow loops like extremely relaxed fireworks. Maybe you see geometric shapes doing interpretive dance. Maybe you see absolutely nothing, but it feels meaningful anyway, like your mind is tidying up the attic while you sit quietly in the hallway. Your sense of self loosens slightly. Not disappearing, just stretching, softening, dissolving around the edges like a sugar cube in warm tea. You're not losing yourself, you're expanding. Your thoughts drift apart, creating space where there was once a tightly packed crowd of anxieties holding a daily conference call in your head. Suddenly a random memory floats in, a conversation you had years ago, a moment you forgot, a feeling you buried because you didn't have time to deal with it when it happened. Ketamine has an odd way of retrieving these little emotional artifacts and placing them gently in your lap, like a cat presenting a gift. You look at the memory, you feel it, but you don't spiral, you just notice. This noticing is what surprises most people. Under the medication's influence, even uncomfortable memories don't sting the way they usually do. They appear with softened edges, like someone turned down their emotional volume. You can explore them without armour, without bracing yourself, without that familiar tightening in your chest. Sometimes your mind gets creative. You may find yourself floating through landscapes that don't exist, forests made of light, oceans made of sound, hallways that stretch impossibly long. You might glimpse a symbolic version of your stress, or watch your inner critic shrink into a tiny cartoon character who looks a little embarrassed for being so dramatic all the time. You're drifting between worlds, not dreaming, not thinking, just experiencing passively, curiously, gently. Occasionally you remember you're in a recliner in Los Angeles. You think, oh right, I'm here. And then the thought wanders away again, uninterested in staying for long. Your concept of time becomes very unreliable. Minutes stretch, expand, float past. You feel like you've been on this journey for hours or maybe seconds. You're not sure. You don't care. Time is a guest in this experience, not a host. Through it all, you remain safe, anchored by the quiet presence of your therapist. They sit nearby, checking your vitals, occasionally offering grounding words. Their voice feels like it's coming from a gentle distance, close enough to comfort you, far enough not to interrupt your inner expedition. And as your mind drifts deeper into this strange in-between space, you realize something remarkable. Your brain is finally giving itself permission to let go, to reorganize, to reimagine, to heal. One weird moment at a time. Scientists believe ketamine works by rapidly boosting connections between brain cells. In simple terms, it's like forcing your brain to reboot its emotional operating system. Old thought patterns loosen their grip, and for a while, new perspectives become possible. You can actually feel it happening, not in a painful, medical way, but in a soft, digital sort of way, as if a very polite IT technician has entered your mind and said, hey, your emotional software has been running the same glitchy update since 2009. Mind if we power cycle it real quick? And you, exhausted from years of emotional buffering, happily nod yes. It starts subtly. Thoughts that normally arrive with the subtlety of a marching band begin approaching you quietly, almost shyly. Instead of barging into your consciousness screaming, here we go again, they drift in wearing slippers. Old patterns, usually so familiar they're practically roommates, suddenly lose their authority. The voice in your head that narrates everything with unnecessary drama. It steps aside, takes a lunch break, retires early. Inside your mind, it feels like someone has unplugged the tangled box of emotional Christmas lights you've been hauling around for decades, shaken them out and plugged them in again, only to discover they actually work fine. All the sparks, the misfires, the unexpected shorts quiet down. Your brain feels spacious, not empty, just roomier, like you finally cleaned out a closet you've been afraid to open. You didn't even know you had this much mental floor space. This is where ketamine's magic really starts showing itself. The neural reset doesn't erase anything. It doesn't overwrite your memories or turn you into a blissed-out robot. It just softens the edges. It unhooks the emotional Velcro that kept certain thoughts glued to you like clingy barnacles. Suddenly, the things that felt too big to handle feel manageable, maybe even a little silly. A problem that used to send you spiraling. Now it looks like a minor software error, a regret that haunted you. It feels distant, like hearing an old voicemail from someone you vaguely remember. That looming feeling of doom? It hasn't vanished. It's just waiting politely in the hallway instead of pacing circles in your living room. For years, depression may have convinced you that your thoughts were carved in stone. But in this moment, those once immovable ideas look more like sticky notes someone slapped on your mental whiteboard during a meeting that should have been an email. You start to wonder, what if I don't have to keep these? Meanwhile, deep in the neural machinery, synapses are firing like electricians working overtime. New connections appear. Old ones reorganize. Your brain is rewiring itself, smoothing out internal bottlenecks, rerouting emotional traffic so it no longer jams in the same destructive intersections. Imagine the world's tiniest construction crew patching potholes in your neural highway system, wearing hard hats, drinking tiny cups of coffee, doing union-approved emotional renovations. And even though the process is invisible, you can feel the results. A lightness starts spreading, not euphoric, not manic, just quietly relieving. Like realizing the emotional backpack you've been carrying was filled with bricks you didn't need. This is why researchers compare ketamine to an emergency reboot. Traditional antidepressants can take weeks to shift the mental landscape. Ketamine nudges the system almost immediately. It presses that hidden reset button, the one you didn't know existed but desperately needed. Over the next minutes, hours, or even days, these changes settle into your awareness. Thoughts that once felt fused together begin separating. You can observe them, analyze them, even laugh at them without instantly falling back into the same spiral. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase the challenges ahead. It doesn't replace long-term therapy or self-work. But it gives you a window, a precious window, where your mind feels flexible again, where possibilities that felt impossible yesterday suddenly make sense, where the emotional storm quiets just enough for you to breathe, for you to think, for you to imagine something new. It's not a cure, it's a reset, and sometimes a reset is exactly the thing you've been waiting for. Once a few high-profile figures quietly mentioned their experiences, curiosity exploded. In Hollywood, trends spread faster than gossip at an award show after party. Soon, writers, producers, actors, and entrepreneurs began exploring psychedelic therapy as a potential shortcut to mental clarity. The moment a celebrity hints at personal transformation, Los Angeles collectively leans forward like it's overhearing a secret. It starts subtly, an Instagram caption about expanding consciousness, an interview where someone casually mentions healing work, a podcast where a very wealthy person says something like, "I just feel more aligned." Those phrases light up the Hollywood community, like a bat signal for people who haven't slept properly in 5 years. You watch from a distance as celebrities begin dropping clues, the way royalty used to hint at political alliances by choosing a slightly different colour sash. Suddenly, big names are saying things like, "I realised I was holding tension in my soul," and the entire city nods as though that sentence makes perfect sense. Because here's the truth. Hollywood is built on reinvention. You can go from teen heartthrob to gritty anti-hero to socially conscious producer in under a decade. Transformation is currency, healing is branding, and a treatment that promises emotional reset, That's practically irresistible. It's not that celebrities don't struggle like everyone else, they do. They just have better lighting. Behind the scenes, many of them wrestle with anxiety, burnout, and the crushing pressure of staying relevant. When the whole world expects you to be extraordinary, you end up doing extraordinary things just to feel okay. So when ketamine therapy whispered its way into the mental health conversation, celebrities listened closely. Then they tried it, and then they started talking about it very selectively. A late-night host joked about floating through childhood. A singer mentioned a mystical afternoon that changed my brain. An actor told a magazine they had an emotional software update. These weren't detailed confessions, just breadcrumbs. But in Hollywood, crumbs are enough to start a movement. Soon, wellness influencers joined in. People with perfect skin and job titles like intuitive strategist or soul alignment curator began posting softly lit videos discussing journeys inward. They sipped adaptogenic lattes while describing breakthroughs that sounded suspiciously like supervised dissociation. Producers and executives got curious next. They're always chasing an edge, the next big idea, the next brilliant insight, the next calm moment where their brains aren't vibrating, like overworked server wires. And ketamine therapy seemed to offer that rare thing, a break from the mental marathon they've been running for decades. And once those people were on board, game over. Hollywood adopted ketamine therapy the way a toddler adopts a new snack. Fully, passionately, sometimes excessively. Suddenly conversations at industry events shifted. You'd overhear someone at a rooftop mixer saying, "My therapist suggested a ketamine protocol," with the same casual tone they'd used to talk about hiking Runyon. Someone else would nod and say, "Oh yes, I've been meaning to try that," as if they were discussing a brunch spot, not psychedelic medicine. It wasn't long before journalists picked up the story, then wellness brands, then tech entrepreneurs who started describing ketamine sessions as brain optimization moments, which is a very Silicon Valley way of saying, my emotions finally chilled out for an afternoon. But beneath all the trendiness, there's a quieter truth. People were benefiting, really benefiting. Some celebrities who had struggled for years with depression or trauma finally felt relief. Others found the clarity they needed to step away from toxic projects. Some rediscovered creativity or compassion or the ability to sleep without their thoughts tap dancing through their brain at 3 a.m. Word of those changes spread faster than any PR campaign. Not because of hype, but because of hope. Real, palpable hope that healing might be possible in a world where everyone is expected to sparkle constantly. And that's the real reason celebrities talk about it. Not because it's trendy, not because it's marketable, but because even in a city built on illusion, the desire to feel okay is profoundly real. Inside the clinic, time begins to blur. Nurses move quietly. Therapists whisper gentle reminders to breathe. Outside, Los Angeles traffic roars and horns honk. But in here, the atmosphere is strangely peaceful, like a spa, designed by neuroscientists. You notice it almost immediately. The room has its own gravity. Not heavy, not oppressive, just a soft, steady pull towards stillness. The walls seem to absorb sound, wrapping everything in a muffled hush that feels almost sacred. Even the lights glow gently, as if they attended a training on how not to startle anxious brains. Your recliner has shifted from comfortable to, oh wow, this might be the safest chair on earth. The way it supports your body feels borderline emotional. You could write this chair a thank you letter. You could nominate it for an award. Supporting actor in a drama about your nervous system. The music in your headphones deepens. The ambient hum moves like a slow tide washing across your awareness. Every so often, a soft chime sparkles at the edge of your perception. Less a sound, more a reminder that the world is still gently turning. and you begin to drift. You're aware of the therapist seated beside you, but their presence feels distant in the loveliest way. Not gone, just softened, like someone turned their physical form into a whisper. They don't speak unless necessary. They don't intrude. They are simply the anchor in the corner of the room, the lighthouse in case your thoughts wander into choppier waters. Then there are the nurses, moving with the quiet precision of woodland creatures who have taken an oath never to disrupt a patient's vibe. They glide around, checking monitors, adjusting blankets, occasionally giving a small nod as if to say, yes, you're doing great. Yes, your brain is currently floating somewhere between Jupiter and your childhood home. That's totally normal. The separation from the outside world is surreal. Just beyond the walls, someone is definitely arguing loudly on Sunset Boulevard. A dog is barking at nothing. Someone in a car is honking while drinking iced coffee the size of a flower vase. But none of that reaches you. The chaos of Los Angeles might as well be happening in a parallel dimension. In here, your nervous system is finally taking a lunch break. As the infusion continues, the room begins to feel larger, not physically, but spacious in an internal way. You feel like you could stretch your awareness all the way to the corners of the ceiling without moving a muscle. Your breath becomes deeper, your chest loosens. You start to realize just how tense your body usually is. This room isn't just calm, it's revealing how not calm you normally are. Soft thoughts drift in, tiny emotional revelations, half-formed insights. You don't try to hold on to them. They come and go like birds landing briefly on a quiet branch. You feel oddly okay with that. Not every thought needs to be interrogated or solved. Some just want to be witnessed. Occasionally, your therapist murmurs something like, "You're safe," or just let the experience unfold. Their voice reaches you in the gentlest way, sliding into your awareness like warm light under a door. And somehow, even though the phrase "you're safe" is simple, your entire body seems to physically agree. Your sense of time continues dissolving. The clock could say 3 minutes have passed or 45. You wouldn't be able to tell. The room feels suspended like a snow globe that someone stopped shaking. You realise that this right here is part of the therapy. The permission to pause. The permission to be held by stillness. The permission to let your mind stop clenching everything so tightly. For the first time in a long time, nothing is demanded of you. No emails, no deadlines, no smiling politely at people who say things like, "circle back and touch base." No pretending, just quiet, just breath, just your mind unwinding itself slowly, organically, gently. The world outside keeps rushing, buzzing, honking, panicking. But inside the ketamine room, none of that matters. Here, for a precious moment, you get to exist without pressure. Here, you finally get to rest. During sessions, some people revisit old memories, childhood moments, forgotten conversations, regrets that quietly shaped their lives. The experience can feel oddly detached, as if watching scenes from a film rather than reliving them. It doesn't happen all at once. It's more like your mind slowly opens a door you didn't know was there, and suddenly a soft parade of moments begins drifting through. Not dramatic scenes, nothing Oscar-worthy, but the simple, embarrassing, tender, confusing fragments that have been sitting in dusty emotional storage boxes for years. You watch them unfold with surprising calm. There's you at 5 years old, missing your front teeth and wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big because you'll grow into it. You're clutching a popsicle, melting it onto your shoes because 5-year-old you had priorities and precision was not one of them. Normally this memory might make you cringe, but here it feels sweet. You observe it like a historian studying an ancient artifact. Look at that tiny human. They had no idea what taxes were. They just wanted sugar. Another scene floats in, slow and shimmering. A conversation you forgot. Someone told you something kind. or something painful, or something you misunderstood at the time. But instead of feeling the old surge of emotion, you watch from a gentle distance. It's like sitting in the back row of a theatre, munching popcorn while your life plays out on stage with surprisingly decent lighting. Then the carousel rotates again, and up comes a regret you've been trying to avoid. Maybe you snapped at someone you love. Maybe you stayed in a job too long. Maybe you bought Bitcoin at the worst possible moment. Whatever it is, it rises softly, not to punish you, but to be acknowledged. Ketamine has a way of peeling the emotional charge off these memories, leaving the shape but not the sting. You examine the regret like an object at a museum, curious, reflective, but not overwhelmed. For the first time, you're allowed to look at your past without instantly spiraling, without the shame soundtrack, without the voice in your head saying, "Wow, we really goofed that one up, didn't we?" The memory becomes a scene, not a sentence, a moment, not a verdict. Sometimes the carousel shows you things you forgot entirely, the good stuff, a hug you needed, a laugh you hadn't heard in years, a moment when someone believed in you before you believed in yourself. These memories hit differently here. They feel like sunlight warming old, cold corners of your mind. As you drift deeper, you notice your emotional reactions are softer. Your brain isn't trying to protect you from your own past. Instead, it's gently guiding you to look, understand, and release. You feel like a tourist in your own history, one with a backstage pass and no emotional baggage fees. Occasionally, the carousel gets weird. You might see something symbolic, a hallway, a river, a door, a giant floating sandwich. Your mind is trying to communicate in metaphor, and you just roll with it. This is ketamine. The subconscious is unionized and creative. Your therapist sits quietly beside you, occasionally asking a grounding question like, "What are you noticing?" You don't have to answer out loud. Sometimes the answer is simply, "Oh, everything makes a bit more sense now," or "Wow, I didn't know that memory still lived here," or "Why am I crying about a popsicle?" The memories continue rotating, slow and steady. They're not rushing at you. They're wandering, curious, like they're also trying to understand themselves. Eventually the carousel slows. Each scene fades like the end of an old film reel. You feel a gentle exhale move through your entire body, as though your mind just completed a delicate emotional filing project and is pleased with its organizational skills. You're not healed. No therapy works that quickly. But something shifted. The past feels lighter, less sticky, less like a pile of unresolved emotional laundry, and more like a series of chapters you can finally read without fear. As the carousel slips away, one thing becomes clear. Your memories aren't here to haunt you anymore. They're simply here to be seen. Of course, none of this comes cheap. Ketamine therapy sessions in Los Angeles can cost thousands of dollars. In a city where personal growth is practically an industry, emotional breakthroughs sometimes arrive with luxury price tags. You learn this the same way most people do, when the clinic hands you the bill and your soul briefly leaves your body to hover near the ceiling. It's not that you weren't expecting it. This is Los Angeles, after all. This is the city where people will pay $48 for a salad that features exactly one strawberry and a sprinkling of hope. But still seeing the actual number printed in bold font makes you blink twice just to make sure you didn't hallucinate early. There's something strangely poetic about it. Your emotional liberation comes bundled with financial devastation. It's practically a metaphor for living here. The receptionist, who radiates the serene energy of someone who has definitely been through an ayahuasca retreat, smiles sympathetically. "We do offer payment plans," she says gently, as if she isn't asking you to pay slightly more than a plane ticket to Europe for 45 minutes of supervised dissociation. You thank her, because this is Los Angeles and politeness is free. One of the few things that still is. In the waiting room, you look around at the other patients. They all have that same glazed but hopeful expression. You can practically hear the silent monologue running through their minds. Yes, I will pay this. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, I am absolutely hoping enlightenment comes with a money-back guarantee. It doesn't, by the way. The clinic's brochure does not shy away from explaining why the treatment costs so much. There are medical professionals, there are monitoring devices, there are specialised protocols, but also, and let's be honest, there's the decor, the mid-century chairs, the hand-woven blankets, the ethically sourced mood lighting, the abstract art pieces that look like they were painted by someone going through a spiritual awakening in Iceland. All of it designed so you feel held, supported, comforted, and financially drained. But this is Los Angeles, where people will spend absurd amounts of money on anything that promises emotional clarity. Life coaches, manifestation seminars, cold plunges, chakra realignments, silent retreats into Panga, where you pay $600 to sit in a forest and contemplate your taxes. In that context, ketamine therapy fits right in. You start noticing just how normal it is for people here to treat self-improvement like an Olympic sport. Your friend is trying EMDR. Your coworker is microdosing mushrooms. The barista is doing breathwork that sounds suspiciously like heavy sighing. Everyone is trying something to feel just a little less unhinged. And yes, some of them are doing ketamine sessions. The price becomes part of the mystique. Something to mention quietly at brunch like you're discussing a secret club. That's how personal growth works here. The higher the cost, the more legitimate it must be. But let's be fair, for many people, the cost isn't about luxury. It's about desperation. When you've tried everything else, when you're tired of carrying your sadness like an extra organ, when nothing conventional has worked, you begin to think in new ways. You begin to justify things you never thought you'd consider. You think, if this helps me feel like myself again, it might be worth it. And honestly, that thought is what keeps these clinics alive. Because behind the price tag is something rare, the possibility of relief, not a cure, not a miracle, just a temporary reprieve from the heaviness you've been hauling around for years. You can't put a price on that. Except Los Angeles has, and it is very high. Still, as you gather your belongings and head toward the exit, you notice something. Your shoulders feel a little less tense, your mind a little quieter, your heart a little lighter. Maybe enlightenment is expensive, but then again, so is suffering. And between the two, you know which one you'd rather invest in. Therapists in these clinics play a fascinating role. They aren't traditional talk therapists during the session itself. Instead, they act as guides, helping patients interpret what they experienced once the journey ends. They're the emotional air traffic controllers of psychedelic therapy, quietly ensuring you don't mentally wander into restricted zones or attempt to land your inner child on the wrong runway. They sit beside you with the calm energy of someone who has absolutely seen it all. And they have. They've watched people cry, laugh, confess secrets to the ceiling, discuss business strategies with imaginary dolphins, and once allegedly serenade a lamp. Nothing surprises them anymore, not even you. Before the session begins, your therapist meets you with a warm smile that instantly makes you feel like you're in the presence of someone who owns multiple plants and remembers all their birthdays. They explain the process with a gentleness designed to soothe even the most anxious brain. They don't use intimidating terms. They don't overwhelm you with science. They simply say things like, "Whatever arises, we'll explore it later," which is therapist code for, your subconscious is about to do some very weird stuff, and that's okay. During the session, they become something else entirely. Not a commentator, not a lecturer, not an interpreter. More like a lighthouse, a quiet presence, a soft glow in your peripheral awareness reminding you that you aren't drifting alone through the cosmic soup of your own mind. They sit in a chair just far enough to give you space, but close enough to anchor you if needed. Their posture is relaxed. They're breathing slow. Their vibe? Somewhere between gentle wizard and unofficial emotional support human. They don't guide the experience directly. They don't ask you questions mid-journey. They don't interrupt your mental slideshow unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they hold the space, a phrase that sounds abstract but becomes beautifully literal when you're floating through a kaleidoscopic exploration of your childhood insecurities. Occasionally you'll hear their voice drift into your consciousness like a soft breeze through an open window. "You're safe," they might whisper. Or "just notice what's happening." Or "you don't need to control anything right now." These statements feel like balm for your nervous system. Your entire body responds, unwinding another layer of tension you didn't even know you had. And once the session ends, their role shifts again. Now they become a translator, someone who helps interpret the emotional hieroglyphics your brain generated while you were dissolving into a cloud of introspection. This part is called integration, and it's where the real work happens. The therapist sits with you, warm tea in hand, and gently asks what you remember. Sometimes you have an elegant insight. Sometimes you can only describe what you saw as a large glowing cube talking to me like my grandmother. They take it all in stride. They help you connect the imagery and emotion to your real life, without judgment, without rushing you, without treating your experience like anything other than meaningful. They ask questions that open doors. What do you think that symbol represented? How did that memory feel in your body? What changed for you afterward? And you find yourself saying things that suddenly make sense. Things you've carried for years. Things you didn't know had words. They guide you through it with steady compassion, helping you place the puzzle pieces of your experience into a coherent picture you can actually use moving forward. Because the truth is, ketamine itself isn't the whole treatment. The therapist is the one who helps you build something from the journey. Without them, the insights might float away like emotional balloons. With them, they become stepping stones. They're not gurus, not shamans, not mystical beings descended from the astral plane. They're trained professionals, steady, grounded, deeply human, who care enough to walk with you through the places your mind rarely gets to visit. And that might be the most healing part of all. After the effects wear off, patients often discuss what surfaced during the experience. Thoughts, insights, emotional breakthroughs. This stage, known as integration, is where the therapy truly begins to make sense. You're still a little floaty when the therapist guides you into a cozy room that feels like a cross between a meditation den and a Scandinavian Airbnb. Soft pillows, warm lighting, a small wooden table with tissues that look far too elegant to be used for actual tears. There's even a plant in the corner, the kind that seems to thrive no matter how many emotional breakdowns it witnesses. You sit down slowly, as if gravity hasn't fully reintroduced itself. The therapist hands you a cup of herbal tea that smells vaguely like insight. They settle into the chair across from you, legs crossed, posture perfect, expression open and patient, the human embodiment of a deep exhale. "Whenever you're ready," they say gently, which is hilarious because you have no idea where to begin. Your brain is still rearranging itself after the journey. You feel like someone took all your thoughts, threw them into the air like confetti, and now you're watching them drift back down in a totally different order. Not chaotic, just reorganized. Tidier. Like your mind finally hired a professional organizer who loves color-coded bins. Slowly you start talking. Not eloquently, not poetically, just honestly. You describe the memories that surfaced, the emotions that visited, the strange symbolic imagery that made perfect sense at the time, like the giant floating feather that told you to relax more, or the hallway lined with doors representing every decision you've ever been afraid to make. Your therapist listens intently, nodding in that deeply validating way therapists do, as if everything you're saying is profound and not at all bizarre. They ask gentle questions. What stood out the most? How did that moment feel? What do you think your mind was trying to show you? Not interrogating, just guiding, helping you transform the dreamlike experiences into language you can use in real life. And slowly, something clicks. You begin to understand the emotional threads running through your session, the patterns, the fears, the long-carried burdens your brain finally had the space to address, things you've avoided, things you forgot, things you kept tucked neatly under the metaphorical rug until your subconscious decided to pull that rug out and shake it firmly. The therapist helps you connect these insights to your actual life, not in a self-help book kind of way, in a practical, grounded, surprisingly gentle way. Maybe a painful memory resurfaced, but instead of being overwhelmed, you watched it with compassion. The therapist helps you explore what that shift means. Maybe you realized how hard you've been on yourself, noticing a critical inner voice you never questioned before. The therapist helps you imagine what softness might look like. Maybe you saw a symbolic image that made no sense at the time, but now, with distance, reveals something quietly important. Integration is where the wisdom lands. It's where the ephemeral becomes useful, where the surreal becomes practical, where your mind's strange journey starts handing you little emotional tools, one by one, like, here, I think you'll need this later, and your therapist helps you tuck them gently into your toolkit. As you continue talking, the session takes on a rhythm. You uncover something, pause, breathe. The therapist reflects it back in clearer words. You understand it better. It becomes less heavy, less tangled, less intimidating. This is where the healing settles in, not just in the floating or drifting or dissolving, but in the quiet conversation afterward, in the naming of things, in the making sense of them, in the taking of insights from the hazy inner world and bringing them into the bright, busy, complicated outer one. By the end of the integration session, you feel grounded again. The floatiness has faded, replaced with a soft clarity, like your mind wiped its glasses clean and can finally see the horizon again. You step out of the room a little lighter, a little steadier, carrying something intangible but unmistakably real, a new understanding of yourself, and a small but powerful shift in the way you move through the world. Hollywood wasn't the only group interested. Tech entrepreneurs, always eager to optimize the human mind like a software program, began exploring psychedelic therapy as well. Because of course they did. If Los Angeles treats emotional wellness like a spiritual quest, Silicon Valley treats it like a hackathon. And once tech founders heard whispers about ketamine's ability to reboot neural pathways, the entire Bay Area perked up like someone had just announced a new productivity app that also dispenses free equity. You can picture the moment it happened. A circle of tech executives sipping ethically sourced matcha, nodding gravely as someone says, "What if ketamine is the update our brains have been waiting for?" Suddenly half the room is Googling clinical trials, and the other half is writing Medium articles titled, "How a Ketamine Infusion Helped Me 10 Times My Emotional Bandwidth." Tech people love 3 things: data, innovation, and doing things earlier than everyone else, and ketamine therapy checked all 3 boxes. Before long, quiet clinics began popping up around San Francisco, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, medical spaces disguised as minimalist lounges where people discussed their feelings using terms like beta version and internal patch notes. You walk into one of these Silicon Valley clinics and immediately notice the difference. The vibe is less healing sanctuary and more co-working space for your subconscious. Instead of Tibetan bowls, there are sleek tablets. Instead of Himalayan salt lamps, there's a whiteboard with diagrams of neural networks. And instead of soft spiritual music, there's ambient electronic soundscapes composed by someone who definitely owns several modular synthesizers. The patients are different too. Hollywood enters the clinic whispering about trauma, heartbreak, burnout. Silicon Valley enters saying things like, "I'm hoping this improves my problem-solving speed. I want deeper focus during investor meetings. I'm aiming for an overall emotional systems upgrade. No one cries, at least at first." They describe sadness using mathematical metaphors. "My mood stability has experienced significant volatility," or happiness metrics have been trending downward quarter over quarter. Ketamine therapy appealed to tech culture because it felt like a shortcut, a fast, elegant solution to the clunky inefficiencies of the human mind. Why spend years unpacking childhood wounds when a carefully measured IV drip could offer emotional clarity by lunch? In Silicon Valley logic, this made perfect sense. Investors caught wind and began circling. Suddenly, psychedelic startups became a thing. Venture capitalists who previously funded apps that delivered groceries, scooters, and heartbreak now poured money into companies promising to revolutionize mental health with licensed clinicians, proprietary software, and branding that looked suspiciously like an Apple keynote. Some founders even combined ketamine sessions with wearable devices that tracked brain activity in real time. Because what's more relaxing than drifting through the cosmos of your subconscious, while a small wristband judges your biometrics? But beneath all the tech jargon, something real was happening. These entrepreneurs weren't just chasing optimization. Many of them were quietly unraveling. Burnout, stress, loneliness, the crushing pressure of managing companies worth billions before age 30, the emotional toll was staggering. Silicon Valley might be brilliant, but it is far from gentle. Ketamine therapy offered something rare in that world: a pause, a breath, a moment where productivity didn't matter. Some tech founders emerged from sessions with tears in their eyes, shocked that they, people who had spent years living inside spreadsheets, actually had emotions. Real ones. Not just KPI-related stress responses, actual feelings. Others found clarity on their relationships, their fears, their relentless drive to build things because they were too afraid to sit still. And slowly, a shift happened. Tech stopped treating ketamine like a performance enhancer and began treating it like a doorway into the parts of themselves they'd been ignoring while chasing deadlines and venture capital. Hollywood had embraced ketamine to soothe creative burnout. Silicon Valley embraced it to soothe existential overclocking. Two different worlds, one very unusual treatment, the same quiet longing to feel human again. Ketamine therapy became part of a larger movement sometimes called the Psychedelic Renaissance. Researchers began studying substances like psilocybin and MDMA for mental health treatment. It's an unexpected twist in modern science, a cultural plotline nobody saw coming unless they were paying very close attention to neuroscience, counterculture history, and the collective exhaustion of humanity. Suddenly, substances once associated with music festivals, lava lamps, and people named Moonflower began appearing in peer-reviewed journals. And not ironically, serious researchers with serious degrees and serious glasses started talking about mushrooms the way sommeliers talk about wine. You watch the shift unfold like a slow-motion montage. First, there's a trickle of studies showing promising results. A patient with PTSD finds relief. Someone with crippling anxiety has a breakthrough. A person who felt stuck in grief suddenly feels the first hint of light. These aren't Hollywood stories or late-night anecdotes whispered over chamomile tea. They're data points, real ones, backed by brain scans, clinical trials, and scientists who use phrases like neuroplasticity enhancement with genuine enthusiasm. Then the trickle becomes a current. Universities establish entire research centers dedicated to psychedelic studies. Stanford, Johns Hopkins, NYU, the academic big leagues. Professors who used to avoid the topic now discuss it openly. Graduate students sign up for projects involving mushrooms and trauma recovery Instead of fruit flies and boring enzymes, TED Talks multiply, documentaries appear, podcasts explode. Suddenly, everyone's aunt seems to know someone who's microdosing. It feels like a cultural déjà vu, echoes of the 1960s, but this time with fewer tie-dye shirts and much better safety protocols. You start noticing a shift in the way people talk about psychedelics, not as escapism, not as rebellion, but as medicine. A new vocabulary emerges. People say things like therapeutic dose and guided session instead of, I saw colours that don't exist, and the public listens because the science is compelling, and because nearly everyone knows someone who has struggled with mental health. The Renaissance expands, gathering momentum. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, shows potential for treating depression and end-of-life anxiety. MDMA, once associated with neon bracelets and questionable dance moves, becomes a breakthrough treatment for trauma. LSD, ayahuasca, DMT all begin appearing in conversations that used to belong exclusively to psychiatrists who prescribed traditional medication. You marvel at how the world has changed. For decades, these substances lived in the shadows, stigmatized and misunderstood. Now, they're being escorted into hospitals, clinics and labs by respected doctors wearing lab coats and earnest expressions. Even governments start paying attention, carefully, cautiously, because nothing makes a group of policymakers perk up faster than the phrase, "This might actually help people." Psychedelic therapy doesn't promise enlightenment or instant happiness. It isn't magical thinking. It's structured, supervised, and deeply intentional. The Renaissance is grounded in evidence, not vibes, and that's what makes it truly remarkable. For many patients, the appeal isn't the psychedelic experience itself, it's the possibility of relief, real, sustained relief, after years of trying everything else. The Renaissance isn't about tripping, it's about giving the brain a chance to heal in ways we barely understood until recently. Ketamine becomes part of this broader movement, the gateway substance scientists could legally study while waiting for the rest of the psychedelic family to catch up. It's like the responsible older sibling who shows up early to set the table before everyone else arrives. And people are taking notice. Clinicians, patients, celebrities, tech founders. Anyone who has ever looked at their life and thought, something in my mind needs a deeper kind of help. This psychedelic renaissance is not a trend, not a fad, not a counterculture revival. It's a re-evaluation of possibilities, a reopening of doors, a moment where science, healing, and human desperation intersect. You sit with the realization that we're living in an era where the mind is no longer treated as fixed, fragile, or doomed to repeat its worst patterns. Instead, it's seen as something flexible, something capable of regeneration, expansion, softness, and change. A renaissance indeed, not loud, not chaotic, but quiet, scientific, and profoundly human. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Some doctors worry about overhyped promises, expensive treatments, and the risk of turning mental health into another luxury trend. And honestly, you can't blame them. Anytime Los Angeles embraces something with both spiritual and scientific language, skepticism becomes a survival skill. Critics appear like wildlife emerging after a rainstorm, cautious, alert, sniffing around for signs of nonsense. And they have questions, good questions. They point out that while ketamine can offer profound relief, it isn't a magic wand. It isn't a cure-all. It isn't emotional glitter that you sprinkle on your trauma and watch it sparkle away. Some doctors fear people might misunderstand the science and expect permanent enlightenment after 2 sessions and a green juice. You can picture these physicians sitting in their offices, leafing through research papers with the subtle disappointment of someone who has watched too many wellness trends spiral into chaos. They've seen this cycle before. First comes excitement, then hype, then Instagram influencers who suddenly brand themselves as integration coaches after one mildly transformative trip in Joshua Tree. The critics raise valid points. Ketamine therapy isn't for everyone. It requires supervision, careful evaluation, and follow-up support. But in Los Angeles, a place where people will put crystals in their armpits if they think it will heal their chakras, nuance can get lost. Some psychiatrists worry the trend is moving faster than the research, that clinics are opening too quickly, that healing journeys are being marketed with the same enthusiasm as boutique fitness classes. One particularly dramatic critic even described ketamine clinics as the soul cycle of psychiatry, which is both harsh and possibly the most accurate sentence ever written. Other skeptics raise concerns about cost. Therapy shouldn't be a luxury item. Mental health shouldn't require a platinum credit card. The fear is that ketamine therapy could become yet another divide. Healing for the rich, coping for everyone else. And if you've spent any time in Los Angeles, you know that divide already exists in most things, from grocery stores to parking spaces to who can afford a couch that doesn't come in a box. Then there's the concern about misuse. Ketamine has a recreational history, and critics worry that in the wrong hands, therapeutic use could blur into unhealthy patterns. They caution that without careful regulation and proper training, the treatment could attract practitioners who know more about branding than neuroscience. Some psychologists raise an eyebrow at the language used in certain clinics, phrases like unlocking your cosmic potential or aligning your energetic self, suspicious that spirituality is being sprinkled over medicine like emotional seasoning. These professionals aren't against healing, they just want clarity, accuracy, fewer buzzwords, less glitter. And then there are the philosophical critics, the ones who wonder what it means that we're turning to psychedelics because modern life has become so relentlessly stressful that people feel trapped inside their own minds. They question whether the problem is actually depression or just being alive in a society that demands constant performance, constant productivity, constant smiling while your soul slowly melts. Their concerns are not unreasonable. And yet, here's the strange twist. Even many of the critics acknowledge that something is happening, something real, something worth studying. They can't deny the research, the success stories, the measurable shifts in people who had all but given up hope. Their skepticism isn't dismissal, it's caution. It's academic vigilance wrapped in a lab coat. Because yes, the hype is loud. Yes, the marketing is occasionally ridiculous. Yes, the price tags make your wallet quietly whimper. But beneath it all, there is genuine scientific promise. Even the most skeptical doctors admit that for some patients, ketamine therapy is not just a trend, it's relief. It's the first relief they've felt in years. It's the moment the mental fog lifts enough to allow breathing again. And so, the critics continue raising their eyebrows, but they're no longer raised in disbelief. They're raised in curiosity, in cautious hope, in the unmistakable recognition that something meaningful might actually be happening here. Beneath the wellness buzzwords, beyond the Instagram testimonials, past the luxury clinics and dim lighting, something real, something human, something worth paying attention to. Still, many patients report real relief. People who spent years struggling with depression sometimes describe ketamine therapy as the first moment they felt genuine emotional lightness. Not the dramatic movie version of relief, no triumphant orchestral swell, no slow-motion smile appearing as a single heroic tear rolls down their cheek. No, it's quieter than that, softer. More like someone finally cracked open a window in a room you didn't know had become suffocating. You hear the stories whispered in waiting rooms, shared gently in support groups, spoken with cautious gratitude during integration sessions. A woman who spent a decade dragging herself through each day talks about waking up the morning after her session and realizing it didn't hurt just to exist. A man who'd been living under a persistent grey cloud describes it lifting, not dramatically, but gradually, like morning fog retreating to reveal a coastline he forgot was there. Some success stories are deeply private, carried quietly by people who don't want to jinx the progress. Others are surprisingly practical. One patient says, "I actually cleaned my kitchen." Another says, "I returned a text message I'd been avoiding for 6 months." Tiny acts, but monumental when depression has been holding every simple task hostage. And then there are the emotional breakthroughs, the ones people tuck into their hearts like fragile treasures. You'll hear someone describe feeling compassion for themselves for the first time, or recognizing that a belief they carried since childhood wasn't truth, just something they absorbed when they didn't know better. Some realize their burnout isn't weakness, it's exhaustion from carrying burdens they were never meant to hold alone. The tone of these stories is never flashy. They don't sound like spiritual awakenings or psychedelic epiphanies narrated by someone wearing 14 bracelets. They sound like people who finally felt the ground beneath their feet again. Like people who remembered they had lungs, and those lungs could fill with more than survival air. What makes these stories powerful isn't the intensity of the experience, it's the gentleness of it. Relief doesn't slam into the mind, it settles. It drapes over the nervous system like a warm blanket that says, "You can rest now." One person describes feeling like they stepped out of a dark tunnel and realized there was sky above them all along. Another says it felt as though someone hit a dimmer switch on their inner chaos. Not off, just down. Enough to make the world feel less loud. Enough to let them breathe without clenching every muscle in their body. You'll meet people whose deepest relief comes not from emotional revelations, but from the simple experience of not feeling trapped inside their own thoughts for an hour. To someone who's lived with relentless mental noise, that quiet is profound, unthinkable, priceless, and these success stories are stitched together by one common thread. Possibility, not certainty, not perfection, just possibility. The possibility that healing is not a lost cause. The possibility that the brain can change. The possibility that life can feel lighter, even if only for a moment, and that moment can lead to more. There's something sacred about the way people speak after these experiences. Carefully, almost reverently, like they're protecting a delicate flame. They know the journey doesn't end here. They know ketamine isn't a cure. But they also know they felt something real, and that feeling gave them the strength to keep going. Some patients say the therapy helped them reconnect with loved ones. Others say it rekindled creativity they thought had died. Some describe laughing for the first time in months and being startled by how foreign and wonderful it sounded. These aren't miracles, they're moments. Small bright moments where the mind remembers how to hope. And in a world where hope often whispers instead of shouts, those quiet success stories might be the loudest proof that something meaningful is happening here, quietly, gently, and deep within the folds of the human heart. As demand grows, clinics continue opening across major cities. What began as a fringe treatment is slowly entering mainstream medicine. Like any good trend, especially one involving both science and serenity, ketamine therapy begins multiplying the way succulents do, quietly, steadily, and in every available corner. One moment there are only a handful of clinics tucked between dermatology offices and yoga studios. The next, they're everywhere, blooming across Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Austin, Seattle, Chicago, and every city where people have collectively decided that their minds could use an update. You start noticing them the way you notice new coffee shops. Not shocking, but strangely inevitable. A building that once housed a Dental practice now has a sleek minimalist sign with a name like MindPath, Clarity Lab, or Inner Nest. Beige waiting rooms get transformed into calming sanctuaries with soft lighting and chairs that look like they were carefully designed to cradle your existential dread. Each clinic has its own flavour. Some go full Zen retreat, bamboo plants, rock gardens, tiny waterfalls engineered specifically to ease your cortisol levels. Others embrace high-tech futurism, glossy surfaces, wall-sized LED mood panels, and intake forms on tablets that make little celebratory chimes when completed. A few blend both aesthetics, as if someone said, "What if Apple designed a meditation studio?" and no one stopped them. The staff grows too. Not just therapists and nurses, but wellness coordinators, integration coaches, neuroscientists, receptionists with unbelievably calming voices, and occasionally a therapy dog whose job description is simply, "be adorable." With each new clinic, the treatment becomes less mysterious, less whispered about, less niche. What once felt fringe now feels familiar, like acupuncture or cryotherapy, or the strange trend of people scheduling IV vitamin drips in the back of chic vans. Except this treatment doesn't just claim to cure hangovers or dehydration, it aims to soothe the aching parts of the mind. Of course, the expansion isn't just aesthetic. It's driven by studies, clinical trials showing real reductions in depression symptoms, improvements in mood disorders, relief from chronic anxiety, PTSD, and burnout. Doctors who once scoffed at the idea now cautiously refer patients. Insurance companies are slowly dipping a single toe into the coverage pool, squinting suspiciously but acknowledging that something real is happening. As the clinics grow, they evolve. Some focus on individualized care, tailoring protocols to each emotional history. Others specialize, treatment for trauma, for end-of-life anxiety, for chronic depression. You start seeing phrases like evidence-based psychedelic therapy on brochures at actual hospitals, printed in fonts that radiate scientific legitimacy rather than festival poster energy. Mainstream medicine begins circling the conversation too. Conferences include entire panels on ketamine's role in future psychiatry. Major universities open psychedelic research centres. Medical journals publish findings with cautiously optimistic language, like significant therapeutic potential, which, in scientific tone, is basically the equivalent of a standing ovation. But with every new clinic, there's also a shift in public perception. People stop whispering about it over brunch and start mentioning it casually, the way one might talk about getting a massage or trying a new Pilates class. I had my third session this morning, someone says, sipping their latte. "Oh, nice," someone replies. "Did you journal afterward?" And no one bats an eye. The normalization creates access, comfort, legitimacy. It allows people who've quietly suffered for years to consider the possibility that relief is no longer reserved for the lucky few. That this is not just a Hollywood experiment or a Silicon Valley optimization trick. It's becoming a genuine medical tool, with protocols, supervision, and results. But the expansion also brings new conversations, concerns about ethics, about regulation, about ensuring quality as demand grows. And yet, despite all the complexity, all the questions, all the debates, the movement continues. More clinics open. More people walk through their doors. More minds experience a moment, even a brief one, of stillness, clarity, or relief. The landscape of mental health is changing, not with a bang, but with a quiet, steady pulse. One clinic at a time, one session at a time, one human being at a time, remembering that their suffering is not immutable. And in a world that feels increasingly overwhelming, the fact that these clinics keep multiplying is, in its own small way, a sign of hope. After leaving the clinic, many patients describe feeling oddly calm. The world looks the same, but their relationship to it feels slightly different. When you step outside, the first thing that hits you is the light. The California sun feels brighter than usual, but not in an aggressive way, more like it's greeting you personally. You squint, not out of irritation, but because your eyes seem newly aware that the universe is using a 500-watt bulb today. The air feels cooler against your skin. Sounds feel softer. Even the ever-present Los Angeles traffic hums in a way that feels vaguely musical, as though all the angry drivers accidentally formed a choir. You take a breath. A real breath. One of those deep inhales that reaches all the way down into the places anxiety normally sits and refuses to move. The inhale feels almost luxurious. The exhale feels like you've just released 200 years of ancestral stress. It's not dramatic, just peaceful, subtle, like unclenching a muscle you didn't know was clenched. Your phone buzzes. Normally that would trigger a small spike of panic, but right now you look at the notification with the emotional neutrality of a monk. Someone texted you about a deadline. Someone else left a voicemail. A bill is due. You acknowledge all of it calmly, the way a wise old owl might acknowledge a leaf drifting to the forest floor. These things still matter, they just don't own you at the moment. Walking to your car, you notice details you usually ignore. The texture of the sidewalk, the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze, a stranger laughing across the street. None of it feels magical or surreal. It's just clearer. As if someone gently wiped smudges off the lens through which you usually view the world. Your mind feels quiet. Not empty, just quiet. The constant internal narrator who usually screams commentary about your life has apparently decided to take the rest of the afternoon off. You're not fighting your thoughts. You're not avoiding them. You're simply observing them float by like soft clouds that don't require analysis or panic. Some people describe this feeling as lightness. Some call it spaciousness. Others call it simply relief. You slide into your car and sit for a moment, not rushing to start the engine. You're not procrastinating. You just realize you don't have to launch yourself into the next task immediately. You can pause, rest, breathe. The world will not crumble if you take 30 seconds to exist without urgency. As you drive, something strange happens. Los Angeles feels less hostile. The billboards aren't shouting at you. The traffic seems manageable. Even the person who cuts you off feels less like a villain and more like a confused participant in life. You briefly entertain the possibility that they too might be struggling. This moment of empathy is fleeting but oddly profound. When you get home, you notice the quiet. Again, not external quiet, internal quiet. You move through your space with a sense of soft awareness. You might make tea. You might lie on the couch. You might stare at the ceiling while contemplating absolutely nothing. And it feels good. Actually good. Not distract yourself from existential dread. Good. Just peaceful. Sometimes insights float in during this period. Unexpected clarity about your behavior, your relationships, your patterns. But they arrive gently, like polite guests tapping softly on the door of your mind. You take them in if you wish. You let them drift away if you don't. There's no pressure. You might journal. You might nap. You might simply exist. For many, this afterglow lasts hours, sometimes days, occasionally weeks. It doesn't solve everything, it's not designed to, but it shifts something. It gives you a foothold on the cliff face of your mental landscape, a little ledge where you can rest before continuing to climb. Life continues. Stress returns. Responsibilities knock. The world doesn't magically transform, but you have changed just a little. Your relationship with the noise is different. Your grip on your thoughts has loosened. Your mind feels like it has more space, more clarity, more softness. And for the first time in a long time, you feel like you can breathe. One reason ketamine therapy may help is that it loosens rigid mental patterns. People temporarily step outside their usual loops of self-criticism or anxiety. You know those mental loops, the ones that spin in your head like a washing machine stuck on the eternal rinse cycle? The same thought again, and again, and again. It's like your brain is trying to win an argument that ended years ago, or rehearse a disaster that hasn't happened, or critique something you said in 2009 to someone who definitely doesn't remember you. These loops become familiar roommates, pacing up and down the corridors of your mind, loudly tapping whiteboards, covered in all-caps notes like, "Why did you say that?" Under ketamine, those loops finally loosen, not disappear, that's too much to ask of any chemical, but soften, unwind, drift apart in a way that feels almost miraculous. It's as if your mind gently steps outside itself, looks down at the anxiety treadmill and says, "Oh, we don't have to keep running on that thing anymore. Huh." The easiest way to describe the effect is that you gain psychological distance. Instead of being inside your stress, you're observing it from the bleachers with popcorn. Your inner critic, usually loud, bossy, and unnecessarily dramatic, becomes quieter, distant, almost embarrassed. Instead of yelling, "You're failing at everything," it mutters something more like, "Well, maybe we could all just calm down." And honestly, that alone feels like a breakthrough worthy of its own parade. Letting go doesn't happen all at once. It's gentle, gradual, a soft shift rather than a dramatic transformation. It feels like unclenching a fist you didn't realize you'd been holding since childhood. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your thoughts lose their sharp edges. It's the mental equivalent of taking off a tight, uncomfortable sweater you thought was part of your personality. In this loosened state, your brain begins exploring new perspectives. Problems that once felt enormous begin looking manageable. Memories that once brought shame appear with compassion instead. You might think, maybe I judge myself too harshly, or maybe that wasn't my fault, or maybe I can let that go now. These realizations aren't forced. They rise naturally, like bubbles in a quiet lake. Something else happens too. You stop gripping every thought as if it's a life or death emergency. Usually when anxiety shows up, we treat it like a smoke alarm, loud, urgent, terrifying. But under ketamine, those alarms sound more like someone tapping a triangle in a high school band, recognizable but no longer catastrophic. You notice the thoughts, acknowledge them, and gently wave them on. No panic, no resistance. A simple, almost elegant release. Psychologists call this decentering. You temporarily detach from the belief that your thoughts define you. You experience yourself with softness, like meeting your mind for the first time and thinking, "Oh, you're doing your best, aren't you?" And that tiny shift can feel life-changing. Letting go also creates space, literal felt space inside you. The mental room where anxiety usually stores its collection of worst-case scenarios is suddenly available again. That space fills with clarity, lightness, curiosity. It doesn't stay forever. This isn't magic. But for a little while, you can breathe without tripping over your own internal furniture. Some describe the experience as stepping off the hamster wheel. Others say it's like floating above their problems long enough to see a path they never noticed. Some people burst into tears, not from sadness, but from relief. The kind that comes from realizing you don't have to keep holding everything all the time. Afterward, when you return to your usual state of consciousness, the rigid loops don't slam back into place immediately. They come back slowly, cautiously, like they're a little unsure of their authority now. You have a new vantage point, a memory of spaciousness. And even if the old patterns try to resume their positions, something in you knows. You can loosen your grip. You can step back. You can breathe. This is the psychology of letting go, not erasing who you are, but freeing your mind from the exhausting belief that it must hold everything together alone. Researchers are now exploring new treatments inspired by these early results. What started in experimental clinics may eventually reshape modern psychiatry. And strangely, you can feel the momentum, a quiet hum beneath the field of mental health, like the vibration of a machine slowly powering up after decades of sitting in a corner collecting dust. For most of modern history, psychiatry has relied on a limited set of tools: talk therapy, medication, lifestyle adjustments, and occasionally the suggestion that maybe you should drink more water. But now the landscape is shifting, expanding, brightening. It's as if a door that's been locked since the 1970s has creaked open, and researchers are peeking inside thinking, are we allowed to go in here again? Turns out yes. Yes, they are. Universities across the world are suddenly buzzing with psychedelic research teams. These are not fringe scientists wearing tie-dye lab coats. These are serious academics, people with grant proposals, safety protocols, and very responsible haircuts. They're studying psilocybin for depression, MDMA for PTSD, ayahuasca for addiction, ibogaine for compulsive behavior, even novel compounds designed to mimic spiritual effects without the unpredictable parts. You can picture the labs, fluorescent lights, rows of computers, brain scanning equipment humming softly like a futuristic beehive. Researchers are analysing neural pathways, mapping emotional patterns, measuring how psychedelics increase connectivity between brain regions that normally avoid each other like awkward co-workers at a holiday party. The findings are impressive, promising, sometimes astonishing, and the world has begun to notice. Foundations are pouring millions into psychedelic research. Policymakers are cautiously removing barriers. Therapists are undergoing specialized training, and a growing number of patients, exhausted by traditional treatments that haven't worked, are stepping forward saying, I'm willing to try something new. Of course, this future isn't going to look like a sci-fi movie where people pop a mystical pill and all their trauma floats away in sparkling mist. Psychedelic therapy is structured, supervised, thoughtful, requires preparation, guided sessions, and integration afterward. The future isn't about handing out psychedelics like breath mints. It's about weaving them into mental health care with the precision of an expert tailor. Imagine a world where a person struggling with lifelong depression doesn't spend years trial and erroring medications. Instead, they undergo a guided psychedelic session where the brain opens, reorganizes, rewires, followed by weeks of therapy to incorporate what they learned. Imagine PTSD treatment that doesn't feel like reliving pain endlessly, but instead offers a compassionate way to process and release it. Imagine addiction therapy that doesn't shame or punish, but gently helps the brain unhook from the patterns that hold it hostage. This future isn't fantasy, it's forming slowly, carefully, ethically. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies are studying compounds that produce therapeutic effects without the hallucinations. Scientists are isolating molecules. Engineers are designing new delivery systems, lozenges, nasal sprays, patches. The future of mental health might end up looking like a blend of ancient wisdom and modern engineering, a strange but beautiful hybrid. And beyond the medical world, culture itself is shifting. People are talking more openly about depression, anxiety, trauma. The old stigma is cracking. The idea that mental health is a private failing is dissolving, replaced by the understanding that the brain is an organ, just as complex and breakable as any other. Psychedelic therapy didn't cause this change, but it's riding the wave, pushing the door wider open. Still, the future won't be without challenges. Critics will question safety, ethics, cost, access. Some governments will resist. Some clinics will be irresponsible. Some research will fail. Progress never moves in a straight line. It wiggles, stumbles, rethinks itself constantly. But the direction is unmistakable. You can feel it. in the cautious optimism of scientists, in the relief of patients, in the shifting tone of the entire mental health field. What began as a fringe treatment, whispered about, doubted, misunderstood, is slowly becoming a pillar of modern psychiatry. Not a replacement for traditional care, but a powerful addition. A new tool in the box. A fresh path for people who have spent too long wandering dark corridors alone. The future of psychedelic therapy isn't just about medicine, it's about possibility. About healing that once felt unreachable becoming imaginable. About giving the human mind more than one way to find its way home. In the end, the popularity of ketamine therapy says something deeper about the culture that embraced it. Because if there's one thing Hollywood excels at besides rebooting franchises no one asked for, it's the endless, restless hunt for meaning. People come to Los Angeles carrying dreams, heartbreaks, unresolved childhood issues, half-finished scripts, and the desperate hope that the universe might hand them a sign or a callback. Either one would be fine. You feel it everywhere in the city. A subtle hum beneath the palm trees and luxury billboards, a longing, a reaching, a constant attempt to fill the internal void with something, anything, whether it's a new career, a new workout routine, a new therapist, a new diet, a new facial serum blessed by a celebrity shaman, or a new treatment that promises clarity in under an hour. Hollywood is built on stories, but very few people here feel like they're living the one they imagined. And that gap, that tension between dream and reality, creates a deep ache that even good lighting can't fix. So people search. They search for purpose, for peace, for direction, for themselves. Ketamine therapy slipped into this landscape like a soft whisper. Not a miracle, not a cure, not a cosmic answer, but a moment of quiet inside a city that never stops buzzing. It offered something surprisingly rare in Hollywood. Stillness, a pause, an opportunity to step out of the endless reel of ambition, comparison, and emotional chaos and simply observe themselves without judgment. And that alone felt meaningful. You notice something else happening too. People begin talking about meaning differently. Not in grand dramatic monologues, but in small, honest ways. Someone says, "I realized I've been running for years, and I don't know what I'm chasing." Another says, "I remembered a version of myself I thought I'd lost." Someone else whispers, "I finally felt enough. It's not enlightenment. It's not mystical awakening. It's just clarity, fleeting, delicate, but real." And in Hollywood, clarity is a rare commodity, almost as rare as parking on Melrose. People here spend so much time performing, for cameras, for audiences, for each other, that ketamine sometimes becomes the first moment they stop performing at all. It's the emotional equivalent of taking off a costume you didn't realize you'd been wearing for 20 years. You suddenly see the tiredness in your own eyes, the hope too, the longing you've been ignoring. Because beneath all the glamour, Hollywood is a place filled with deeply human struggles, rejection, insecurity, loneliness, the constant fear that your best days are already behind you, and the even deeper fear that you never had best days to begin with. Ketamine therapy didn't become popular here because it's trendy. It became popular because it speaks directly to the quiet crisis at the heart of the city. People want to feel real again. Real connections, real emotions, real peace that doesn't depend on applause or external validation. Hollywood's relationship with meaning has always been complicated. This is a place that sells fantasies while secretly craving authenticity. A city where people meditate, journal, manifest, cold plunge, breathwork, sound bath, and vision board their way toward inner peace, only to find it slipping through their fingers again and again. Ketamine isn't the answer, but it's a moment, a window, a softening, a reminder that your mind can feel different, that your heart can open a little, that your thoughts aren't chains. And maybe that's why Hollywood embraced it so eagerly, because beneath the glitz and ambition, everyone here is searching for something deeper, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of themselves untethered from the roles they think they're supposed to play. In a city obsessed with reinvention, ketamine therapy became a tool not for changing who you are, but for remembering who you were before the world got loud. And that, in its quiet way, might be the most meaningful thing of all. Back in the clinic, another session ends. The lights are soft, the music fades, and someone slowly opens their eyes after drifting through the strange landscape of their own mind. You're that someone, blinking, cautiously, as if the world might still be made of dream fog. The room looks the same as before, same gentle glow, same reclining chair, same therapist sitting nearby with the serene patience of a woodland creature. But somehow it feels different. Or maybe you feel different. Lighter, unclenched. Like your soul just received a very unexpected chiropractic adjustment. The headphones are lifted gently from your ears, and instantly the world returns, but softer, less sharp. Like someone turned the contrast down to kindergarten art project. You hear the subtle hum of the air conditioner, the faint shuffle of the nurse's shoes, and the quiet whisper of fabric as your therapist adjusts their seat. Ordinary sounds, yet strangely comforting, like rediscovering your senses after borrowing someone else's for an hour. You breathe in, slowly, deeply. It feels like your lungs suddenly have more square footage than before. The air lands differently in your body, heavier in a good way, grounding you, reminding you that you're back, here, in the physical world, where gravity still works and your responsibilities are waiting patiently in the parking lot. Your therapist asks how you're feeling, not urgently, not intrusively, just softly, as if they're asking how the weather is inside your soul. You try to answer, but the words aren't quite ready yet. Your brain is still packing up the souvenirs from its internal expedition. Clarity, questions, maybe a random image of a glowing staircase or an emotionally supportive jellyfish. You give a small nod instead. The therapist smiles. They understand. The room feels sacred somehow, not in a religious way, more in a this is a safe container for whatever just happened way. It's like a cosmic aftercare lounge, a gentle cocoon where you can exist without needing to perform or react. The lighting helps, soft, warm, positioned at angles that make everyone look like they've just completed a spiritual skincare. Routine. Minutes pass, or maybe seconds, or maybe several small eternities. Time is still stretching itself experimentally, like a cat testing a sunbeam. You're not fully tethered to linear reality yet, and that's perfectly okay. No one here expects you to leap up and start solving your life. The quiet room exists for precisely this moment. The landing. You notice your body again, your hands resting comfortably, your legs feeling heavier, your spine sinking deeper into the chair. Your muscles, which normally cling to tension like it's a competitive sport, seem to have declared a truce. Even your jaw, which has been holding its own personal grudge for decades, appears to have softened. The therapist reminds you to take your time, drink some water, stretch when you're ready. There is no rush. Integration begins here, but not verbally, not yet. First, you simply exist in the aftermath. You let the experience settle, like snowflakes drifting softly to the ground after a storm. Around you, everything feels gentle. The walls, painted in therapeutic neutrals, the blanket draped over your legs, a small comfort that now feels like an emotional support garment. The dimmed lights, whispering calmness, even the small potted plant in the corner seems to be rooting for your emotional well-being. As you sit there, you realize you've crossed a threshold. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but subtle and significant. Something inside you loosened during the journey, a knot untangled, a thought reframed, a heaviness momentarily lifted. You don't know what it means yet. You don't have to. This quiet room is the bridge between your inner world and the outer one, a gentle buffer so you don't collide with reality too quickly. It gives you space to breathe, to reflect, to gather the pieces of yourself with care. And as you finally rise slow and steady, one thing becomes clear. You walk out of the quiet room different from how you entered, not transformed, not cured, but softened in the ways that matter, lighter, even if just for now, and ready to re-enter the world, one breath at a time. Before you even settle fully into the clinic's reclining chair, you start noticing something. Everything here costs money. Not normal money, Hollywood money. The kind where a single throw pillow is probably worth more than your car. The intake form lists optional add-ons like guided meditation, aromatherapy, weighted blankets, and something called intentional vibrational alignment, which sounds suspiciously like a hug your wallet won't recover from. You can almost hear your bank account whispering, "Please have mercy." Because here's the thing, in Los Angeles, wellness is never just wellness, it's branding, it's aesthetic, it's lifestyle, it's a spiritual experience wrapped in artisanal linen and priced like a limited edition handbag. Even before the drip starts, you're being invited to upgrade your healing journey with things that look suspiciously like high-end spa treatments wearing medical lanyards. A staff member hands you a menu, an actual menu listing add-ons you can purchase to enhance your therapeutic outcome. You stare at it in disbelief. Weighted blanket, $75. Aromatherapy blend infused with essential oil sourced from a mountainside monastery, $42. A mindfulness coach who whispers affirmations into your aura, $150. A crystal grid grounding mat, $98. And of course, the premium intention setting ceremony, which is essentially someone lighting incense with tremendous gravitas while asking you your goals for the session. You haven't even sat down yet, and already you feel like accidentally breathing too deeply might incur a service fee. The waiting area doesn't help either. It's decorated with the kind of minimalist furniture that makes you question whether you've entered a clinic or the lobby of an extremely exclusive skincare brand. Fluffy neutral-toned pillows arranged artfully. Smooth wooden side tables that probably have names like Oak Whisper or Sandalwood Reverie. A carafe of cucumber mint water that looks like it was poured by a hydration sommelier. There's even a stack of wellness magazines, each one featuring someone on the cover who definitely wakes up at 4 a.m. to do gratitude journaling while drinking moon water. You flip through one and find ads for $260 leggings made from ethically harvested cosmic fibers. You shut it immediately before your wallet can sense danger. A soft-voiced receptionist hands you a clipboard with a smile that says, "We care about your healing," and a price sheet that says, "We also care about your credit score." You sign your name, trying not to think about how much emotional enlightenment cost per minute of infusion time. The private treatment rooms are just as luxurious. Each one has a reclining chair with memory foam that feels like it learned your birthday. The blankets are thick, plush, and undoubtedly woven by Scandinavian artisans with very soft hands. Even the IV stand looks expensive, sleek metal, no rattling parts, the kind of medical equipment that says, "I was designed by someone who also designs award-winning desk lamps." A small sign in the corner reads, "Premium comfort upgrades available upon request," which is code for, "If you're willing to pay another $200, we will tuck you in like a wealthy burrito." And yet, despite the absurdity, you have to admit there's something comforting about it. The calm atmosphere, the gentle lighting, the scent of lavender drifting like a tiny soothing cloud. The way the nurse wraps the blood pressure cuff so carefully, as if your arm has tremendous emotional potential. It doesn't erase the cost, nothing could, but it does make the whole experience feel safe, soft, held, a contrast to the brutal, jagged chaos of daily life, because maybe that's the real business model here. Yes, they're selling therapeutic treatment, but they're also selling relief, a temporary escape from stress, from overwhelm, from emotional exhaustion wrapped neatly in luxury fabric and billed at a steep hourly rate. And somehow, in a city where people have spent far more money on far less effective wellness trends, it almost makes sense. Almost. Eventually, the ketamine begins to hum through your bloodstream like an elevator that forgot its floor count. Your limbs feel lighter, your thoughts drift outward, and for a moment you're not sure if your body is still in the chair or slowly dissolving into the wallpaper like an overstressed ghost. It's not frightening, just strange, like your brain quietly unplugged itself from reality to go catch up on errands. A nurse checks your pulse, but you barely notice. You're too busy softly levitating in your own imagination. This is the moment everyone tries and fails to describe afterward. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's psychedelic fireworks, but because it places you in a state so gently unreal that language, with all its clunky nouns and verbs, simply shrugs and gives up. You feel present and absent at the same time, like you've become the world's calmest hologram. Your fingers tingle first as though they're sending postcards to the rest of your body whispering, "We're becoming clouds now. Please adjust expectations." Your legs follow, dissolving into a warm, buoyant fog that feels like bathwater made of velvet. The recliner seems to tilt backward slightly, or maybe you're tilting forward, or maybe gravity has taken a personal day. It's impossible to tell. All you know is that you are gently unmooring from every physical rule you've ever followed. The therapist's voice floats into your awareness, soft and far away, like someone speaking through a pillow made of dreams. You hear the words, but they don't bounce around your mind the way language normally does. Instead, they glide in, land softly, and disappear into the warm haze inside your chest. You nod slowly, but you're not sure if the nod occurred externally or was just an internal note written by your consciousness. Then comes the lightness, not emotional at first, but literal. Your torso feels buoyant, like a helium balloon politely refusing to obey physics. You swear the chair beneath you is still there, holding you up, but your body has decided to take a quick vacation and leave only the faintest outline behind. You wonder if this is what astronauts feel like, drifting through orbit while thinking, "I definitely should have put my phone on airplane mode." Your thoughts stretch out like long, lazy ribbons. No urgency, no tension, just gentle expansion. A memory floats in, not because you summoned it, but because your brain apparently hosted an open house and invited your subconscious to wander freely. You watch it pass by without judgment, without grasping, without overanalyzing the way you usually do at 2 a.m. when you're trying to fall asleep. The floating deepens. You begin to feel as though your consciousness is perched just a few inches above your physical form. You're still you, just a slightly upgraded version, free from gravity's persistent clinginess. Colours look softer, sounds stretch out. Time becomes a puddle instead of a straight line. For once, your thoughts are not competing in a frantic race. They are strolling through the park, holding hands and feeding ducks. A faint buzzing sensation hums behind your forehead, not unpleasant, not distracting. More like your brain is defragmenting itself, tidying up messy mental folders while you sit back and enjoy the world's quietest cosmic spa treatment. You feel spacious, airy, gently expanded, like a lantern floating upward into a starless sky. Some people describe this as hovering inside their bodies. Others say it feels like sinking warmly into themselves. You feel like both, simultaneously rising and melting, becoming lighter and deeper, as if you've stepped into a dimension where contradictions peacefully coexist and no one is required to pick a side. The nurse's hand brushes your wrist again, checking your pulse with the tenderness of someone adjusting a sleeping child's blanket. You smile, not outwardly but internally, like a warm light flickering behind your ribs. Everything is okay. Everything is soft. Everything is suspended in quiet, gentle strangeness. And then you realize something. You're floating, yes, but you're also safe, anchored, held by the room, the chair, the therapist, the medicine, and your own willingness to let go. It's not flying. It's not drifting away. It's simply surrender, the rare kind that feels like peace instead of loss. And for the first time in a long time, you allow yourself to float. And so tonight, as you ease back into the comfort of your own reality, the one with warm blankets, working plumbing, and absolutely no premium-priced vibrational alignment fees, take a quiet moment to appreciate just how strange and miraculous the human brain really is. You've wandered through Hollywood's shimmering labyrinth of wellness trends, slipped inside a ketamine clinic that looked like a spa designed by a very calm billionaire, and drifted through your own thoughts like a mildly confused astronaut. You've seen the sessions, the headphones, the guided journeys into emotional deep space. You've watched the city outside keep spinning, honking cars, melting lattes, and overworked screenwriters all trying to find something, anything, that makes life feel a little lighter for a little while. And honestly, who can blame them? This search for meaning has always been a messy business, whether you're a medieval peasant banking a fire or a modern Angelino paying a therapist to help you transcend your ego for exactly 57 minutes. But here's the comforting part. Under all the luxury, all the science, all the whispered celebrity endorsements, the story is really about people trying to heal. People trying to feel okay in a world that doesn't always make that very easy. People trying to stitch together tiny moments of clarity in a life that keeps throwing emails, deadlines, heartache and tax season at them. And that is kind of beautiful. So tonight, as you lie back in your clean bed with a full stomach and the gentle hum of your fan guiding you towards sleep, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the modern world. The world where therapy exists, where medicine evolves, and where your emotional breakthroughs don't require livestock, frostbite, or an unheated hut shared with a goat. Maybe be grateful too for the people who figured out how to turn a horse tranquilizer into a tool for human healing. History is weird. Progress is weirder. But both somehow keep nudging us forward. Because in the end, whether you're drifting through a ketamine journey in a Hollywood clinic or just trying to fall asleep at 2:37 a.m., with your thoughts doing jazz improv, you're still here. You're still trying. You're still finding your way through the chaos with humor, hope, and your own kind of stubborn resilience. And that's enough. So breathe deeply, let your mind settle, and give yourself permission to rest. The world will still be there in the morning. The traffic, the sunshine, the overstimulated chihuahuas, the endless human attempt to feel a little better than we did yesterday. But for now, just let go. Let the quiet come in. Let sleep soften the edges of the day. Good night, guys. Sleep well.